Good afternoon, friends and enemies. I joke, but there's probably more truth to that than I'd rather acknowledge. At least on one side of the coin. I'm here at the, I don't know if they call it Mushtari Park. It's a hell of a way to start a video, right? Some kid's yelling at his parents like, "Hey man, wait up for me, dude." So anyway, it's a beautiful day here. It's sunny. There's a cool breeze coming through. Well, I'd say, yeah, cool. It is definitely still summer weather here. And for me, coming from Missouri, it feels more like the end of September, but here we are just getting halfway through August. And it's a Mediterranean style climate in Georgia, so it's mild compared to Missouri. In terms of the heat there in summer, I prefer, over the last 14 years or so that I've traveled as expat style overseas, I like to come home to Missouri in autumn or spring. I don't like the extremes of winter cold there, which it's not always that bad, but there are certain points, like when I was there last time in December, it was so cold, unusually cold, even for Missouri, that I actually couldn't, there was a couple of days where I actually couldn't finish or do the daily walk that I do because it was that cold. You know, it's like you feel it here, you feel it I had to put gloves on, of course, because it got that cold. So it's unusually cold then. And then in the summer, when I'm back, it's like that type of humidity, that type of heat with the humidity. I don't, after being, for example, in Panama for 13 months, after being in Georgia, and there's a bit more dry heat at times, it's certainly not always the humidity that is there in Missouri. So I just had a goal of what they call climatic sovereignty, which is the idea that, well, you know, it's like the so-called wealthy or the retired, a lot of retired people in the U.S. would be the snowbirds. They'd take off in the winter and go stay in Florida if they could afford it, if they had the time and money. And that's why most of them are retired, because they could have the time and money to go down and spend a winter in Florida where it's still more like summer, and avoid the snow that sometimes comes in a Missouri winter, or the ice or the gray skies. So I remember being back home there in one winter after having been in Panama for 13 months, where there is no winter ever. There's just a wet season and a dry season. And some of the average temperatures up even in the mountains, the lowest it'll get is maybe 59 degrees Fahrenheit, I think. And so there's just no winter, there's no ice, there's none of that gray sky stuff much, unless it's a 2 or 3 hour rain during the wet season. So I rather remembered keenly being back in Missouri. There was ice on the damn sidewalks, on the streets in places, big sheets of ice. There was snow, and I'm thinking, why live this way, man? if you've got the choice, right? Why live in winter here when you can be at minimum in Florida, or a whole world of places, or a half world, or however that works with when it's winter in Missouri, where it's considered spring-like or summer-like, or just not streets with ice and gray skies and, a foot or two of snow, that kind of thing. Now, when I was in Kiev, oh my God, their winters quite a bit longer. One of my favorite places, I'm talking about Kiev, Ukraine. It's further north from here. And I remember the icicles, they were like about a foot or two, 12 to 24 inches. They would actually had killed some people. They would come, there are buildings that would have these edges, and those icicles would just come down and whoosh. I remember the coat that year in that winter, pretty much had to throw it out because all the drip from that, and such a long season, where you'd still be under the effects and in winter weather. So I didn't really prefer that either. Of course, the benefit is that you have less insects, you have less pests, less bugs. But in Panama, that's the downside. You got no winter, but the goddamn mosquitoes, man, they're like little airplanes, I mean? Moths are like, you're like small birds. I shit you not, the moths are like huge. And the bullfrog out back, for the first month, we rented a place for $50. The guy tried to come back later and raise the rent like $10. I just went ape shit. I'm like, what? It's funny, but it's true. It's like, why is Jose trying to raise the rent? We just got here. It's just, but you can't imagine. For $50, we had a 2-bedroom, huge villa, like covered outside sink. We had orange tree, lemon tree, banana tree. We had a huge pond, huge, and a huge backyard, just bigger than what most people would have in, like, say, 90% of my home city where I was born in Missouri, for $50 a month. And I still remember arguing about that because, you get to understand, when you get into a different economy, you start slipping up on that. Everybody be trying to come at you and take advantage of you. So it still cracks me up, though. It's like, what? We just got here. Jose wants $10 more a month. No, we'll leave. We'll move. Anyway, at night you'd hear that bullfrog. You're like, bruh, bruh, just super loud. It's like, and they were big, man. They were bigger. And hey, from Missouri, we used to hunt when we were kids. We used to hunt bullfrogs. We used to eat frog legs, which was kind of like a fish chicken combo. You'd cut the legs off, put them in the frying pan, and sometimes still see them, jump and all that. But the frog legs, you take a gigger, look like the devil's pitchfork or a trident, right? You go out with like on a long bamboo pole or something, and get close enough and then get you a frog. Or we'd take the pellet gun, right? Or if it was off the bridge or on the side of a pond, we'd take the fishing pole and put a little red piece of cloth or tape on the end of a hook, and we'd let that down in front of that bullfrog, and he'd, and then we'd get him like that. We had seen what we thought were the biggest bullfrogs, of course, and we were quite proud of our bullfrogs in Missouri. And you can still go to certain restaurants in Missouri and have the delicacy, and it is considered a delicacy, of frog legs. I remember being with Nana, a lot of Shvili, and her daughter Mako, Eleni, here in Belize. And we went to, it might have been a Mexican restaurant that came and went. I don't know if it's still around or not, but this is probably like 7 years ago. And we went into this, what was a Mexican restaurant here, and they had frog legs. Couldn't believe it, this far over, that they would have the frog legs, but they did. So it's quite a delicacy. So to see, but back to my Panama story, in the backyard, such a huge pond, and we had the bullfrog just just super loud. They'd almost keep you awake at night. You could walk out back and be like, hey man, shut up, it's like, it's just, but they were so big. So anyway, when you've got no winter, your bugs and apparently your bullfrogs, they grow supersize. Supersize is a term in America for your fast food places and your convenience stores. You want something bigger than large, it's supersize. It's like Americans like everything big, Some Americans, big trucks, big cars, big houses, big spaces, big money. A lot of things they like supersize. So they, instead of just large now or extra large, you get a drink that's like twice that or something. It's a crazy amount of sugar water, really, soda water, whatever the hell it is. Caffeine, like 10 times the caffeine. They've got all kinds of crazy shit going on in my country like that. But this bullfrog was like supersized. He's like, whoa. So it was shocking even for me. But I knew when I heard them big sons of bitches out there, I'm like, oh my God, you can hear brah, brah. And at night, because the elevation was near sea level. On the one side, just about 30 miles, 30 minutes that way, was Pacific Ocean. The other side was Atlantic Ocean. We lived in Santa Fe de Vergas for about, like I said, about a month. And maybe a month and a half maximum. I got the goddamn malaria or tropical fever. And Yulia got leishmaniasis, flesh-eating disease. So all up and down her shin, her calf, was this bleeding area, was the flesh-eating disease, and they had lined lines of people to get the vaccines, because that had spread throughout that area. And I had a super doctor that I communicate with for years, and he did things remotely with frequency work and scalar wave electromagnetics, and he worked with the international group of scientists on remotely monitoring and affecting bacteria, viruses, and so on, scanning organs of cosmonauts or astronauts on the International Space Station with an international group of scientists from Japan, Europe, and so on. Anyway, so I'm part of his research and part of his, contributing to all that, and I'm emailing him, and I'm like, he's like emailing me back saying that where you're at, there's the possibility there's going to be leishmaniasis with the flesh-eating disease. So you need these frequencies. So he gave me all these frequencies to run in this Swiss medical device that I used to carry, and it's a research device in America, but in Switzerland it's a class 1 licensed medical device. So we put all these frequencies in there. Yulia got it. I come down with a tropical fever because down there, the point being, you got all these bugs, you got all these insects, you got, like I said, you got mosquitoes that are like little jets. Those. On the flip side, you get little monkeys up in the trees. You've got parrots, beautiful, colorful, all kinds of colorful parrots, parakeets. Some of the neighbors had them in their house in the cage. But you walk out and see them in the trees. Coffee bean trees, where you get it open, you get the bean, or the cocoa. Sorry, it was cocoa. They had coffee there, but what we actually had was the cacao for making cocoa, making chocolate. I don't remember the coffee being actually there. It might have been, but I remember for sure being shown the cocoa nut inside. And so there was, along with the insects, more disease, because the mosquitoes was the biggest problem there, actually, and the tropical fever. So when we got back into this city, it was about 3 or 4 hours by bus, because we were on the edge of the jungle, right on the edge of the jungle. And when I got back into the Vergas, I couldn't leave. My fever was so high. I got stuck in some kind of I think it was a Chinese motel, because it's expensive to be staying like every day, and so I couldn't get up for some days. There was a medicine to take, but the medicine. This sounds like a bullshit story, but you want to talk about how fucked up your travels can be. This is how crazy it can get. Here I am in a Chinese hotel room, right? Way the hell out in the middle, like way out in the middle of Panama, like upper north actually, mid to upper north. And it's probably the size of a city, maybe, I don't know, 30, 40, 50,000, but still it's Panama and it's Central America. Not bad, but there's not a lot going on there. But so I'm in this small Chinese hotel or Mexican hotel or something, and the news comes out that this medicine that Yulia had left to go get from the pharmacy for this tropical disease, this malaria or tropical fever that I had killed 4 or 5 people. Just like bullshit, man. Now we checked several sites on the internet. It was on the local news, and sure as shit, there was a batch of bad medicine that actually killed about 4 or 5 people already for treating what I had. And I'm like, son of a bitch. It's a true story now. You could even go back to that period of time and track that news down. It was in Santa Fe de Vergas, Panama, and it was probably around June, July, or August, I think. Probably, no, it wouldn't have been that. It would have been more like August, September, October. Something like that in 2006. So there's this bad batch of medicine, and it got on the mainstream news. I think, I don't know if it reached America or not. Sometimes news did, sometimes it didn't, and vice versa. So, but it was true. So here I am, and I stayed in that place for almost, I think it was like a week and a half, 2 weeks. I couldn't overcome this shit. And it was crazy because being in the Chinese hotel, you know, you'd hear a lot of people come in and they'd be fucking or having sex, or, you know, you could hear the girl, you know, screaming next to you, whatever, and then they'd leave, and then a little while later somebody else would come into another room. It was one of those places, you know. They'd have sex, they'd stay for a while, they'd leave, and I'm like, and I'm slipping in and out of delirium, like total fever. And everybody's coming into this hotel, staying for a little bit, fucking taking a rest, whatever, and leaving. And I'm like, man, I'm not ever going to get rid of this fucking fever. You're going to have to take me into Panama City, Panama, which was still a hell of a long ways to travel. How am I going to do that without, you know, you're not going to get on a bus when you've got like 104-degree fever and you're having delirium, you know, like when you're like, it's just... But that was a bitch. And we even had the equipment to treat that. And that's one of the times that we had failed to treat it with what I had, which was a tropical fever. She was able to treat the leishmaniasis. She got both medicine specific for the leishmaniasis, the flesh-eating disease, and I think she got rid of it within that week mostly. Got it to go into where it was starting to heal up and disappear. But also the frequency work, we had some of Bob Beck's electromedicine devices and such, but it just, I couldn't kick it. This one I couldn't kick. So that particular failure on the electromedicine and that weird experience about the bad batch of medicine, my luck, right? What the, you know? And because I wasn't going to play that kind of Russian roulette, although I desperately needed it. It's just my luck that this bad batch of medicine had killed 4 or 5 people that I needed to take, and she'd already brought it back, man. And I'm like, oh no, look at the news, you know, it's a true story. So that's what pushed me later, having contacted that tropical fever, that tropical disease, because like I said, we were on the edge of an actual jungle. I mean, for real, it was no bullshit. There's no exaggeration here. It was a jungle, and you know, everybody had a machete on their hip because you need to whack down a pineapple, which Yulia loved pineapple. But Yulia loved it there. She actually wanted me to she wanted us to stop with eBay because, you know, we were always working on eBay and selling eBay wherever we were at in the world. We're always selling on eBay back then. And she just like, let's just stop. Let's just sell this stuff you've got. Let's buy a four-wheeler, because even where the bus stop was, we're up in the small city up, it would take us maybe 45 minutes to an hour to get up to the smallest little city, like in Arrow Rock if you're back in Marshall or Saline County or Missouri. It was like that. I mean, it was like enough to have like 1 or 2 stores, that's it. And it like old style, you know, like you walk in and buy like really old, like maybe canned goods and some powdered goods, that's it. Or packaged goods, that's it. And so, but she's like, yeah, let's just sell your stuff. Let's just take the four-wheeler. We'll buy the four-wheeler and we'll just forget it. We'll just stop doing eBay even. I'm like, oh, we'll just quit everything, because she didn't want to go back in to the post office, because now and then we'd have to go to the post office because maybe we're shipping something from there, but not very often, or we'd have to go check the internet cafe. And she's like, let's just quit everything. She loved it there. But I told her from the beginning what my super doctor said that I always communicated with through the internet. And he's a real genius. I mean, absolutely beyond. And he was a Top Gun jet fighter pilot in Vietnam and helped the U.S. Air Force tweak out and program their computers while being a Top Gun jet fighter. He's actually trained at MIT and so on and so on. He's an absolute genius, as you can imagine, working at the level where he's developing stuff. Also, he's had sent emails signing off as being like chief executive officer of Microsoft operating room of the future, you know, things like this. He's like a mad scientist kind of guy on that level, except there's nothing mad about him. Anyway, that's who I was communicating with. He's the one that gave us the warning in advance, because he has all these maps, he has all the DNA scanners, he has all the the CDC information. So he knew, just by knowing where I was at. He's like, this is what you got to watch out for. And I'm thinking, he's being a little paranoid. You know, I'm here in Panama. What's this flesh-eating disease? We had actually spent a little time with an American Peace Corps worker out there, a woman that had been out living with a family where they had no running water. You had to go get your water from the well. And I don't know if they had electricity or not. I think she said, and anyway, she was from Arizona, so she had grown up like hiking and running and biking and all that stuff. She was in good shape, so she could be out there that far out where we were at. But she was absolutely living in a shack with an actual Panama family. This is what a real American Peace Corps worker will do sometimes. Sometimes they're living out in the middle of the shit. In this case, a shack with no running water, no electricity. I've met American Peace Corps workers here when I used to come into the hostel Envoy, and sometimes we go to the clubs together for a couple of days. That's where all the guys and girls were coming back then through American Peace Corps, and they'd be out up here like for 3 or 4 months or a month at a time, living with some Georgian family way the hell out in the middle of nowhere with barely anything, like maybe just no electricity, no running water. They gotta chop wood, they gotta go get the water from the well. This like very, very primitive style of living, which can still be seen here in Georgia if you get out of the cities, but a lot of American Peace Corps workers do that. So she was there, and she warned us. She's actually the first person to warn us about the flesh-eating disease. But that's when my doctor had sent the stuff over later, saying that he knew about that. He sent the frequencies to treat it. But for Yulia, that worked well, or the medicine. We'll never know which. But hey, when you got that kind of thing going on, you can go at it with electromedicine or frequency medicine if you're into that, and I have been. Or you can go at it with traditional pharmaceutical medicine. So she did both, and her stuff was gone within a week and a half, 2 weeks. But none of the stuff we did could knock out what I had. So later, when I ran into some issues after that, and sometimes when you get malaria or a tropical fever, that stuff can come back. It's kind of like a flashback kind of thing. So I ended up going with the high oxalic acid diet. And I used to have this book on a website that I used to have called OMSH, and it's gone now. But I used to have this book featured on there because I did the high oxalic acid diet. I actually got the oxalic acid rinse. It's oxalic acid dissolved in water, and maybe like boiling water at 10 minutes, and it's in there for so many minutes, and then you're swishing it, and you get like 2 to 3 minutes, you're getting extra oxalic acid. Then you avoid citric acid and any other blockers to oxalic acid, including, I don't know if it's B12 or B6, I think it's B6. And so that I went on to try to combat that later, and it seemed to be the best thing I'd ever done with that. But if you get a tropical disease, you're down there, and that kind of shit is heavy. That's the kind of thing that will just take you down. And you see movies about this where these guys will go into the jungles, or they'll go off into these foreign countries, if you're from the American perspective, in American movies from like all these years I'd seen them, and suddenly you're down, man. You've got this fever, and it'll kick your ass. You're just like, I was down for the count for about 2 weeks. I couldn't even go back to the place. Couldn't. And but it was heavy. But yeah, when we had left out of there on the bus, there were about 40 or 50 people in line to get vaccinations, and they were steadily moving. They'd come up to the table, get the vaccine, maybe sign something, they'd call up the next person, and the whole place was like kind of quarantine for this. So this is not something you're going to find, in your travel and tourism guides. You're not going to hear stories like this. You're not going to see literature like that, like laid out on the hotel bed and not able to move, and bad medicine that's killed 4 or 5 people, and you've got malaria or tropical fever. But if you go to the U.S. State Department's travel sections on different countries, especially India, for example, if you're an American and you're going to travel into India, I think there's a list of at least 3 or 4 vaccinations that you need, and that's one of the serious locations that I'm aware of. I'm sure there's others, but But yeah, deep down in Panama, and that's why I told Yulia up front. I'm like, Yulia, you love it here. I know this is, in astrology and astrocartography, it was on her midheaven sun line. This is like one of your best places you could live and find happiness in the world is on that line if you're into astromaps, astrocartography, or locational astrology. And she just loved it so much. She never wanted to leave. But I told her from the start, I said, look, those mosquitoes, they're carrying something a lot of times. The locals seem to have a little bit more resistance to it, but we don't. And they had, they just eat up on your forearms and your shins, your calves. And I said, I doubt we'll be able to make it more than a month or two here. It's just too many bugs, too many mosquitoes. And sure enough, we lasted maximum, it was like a month and a half, 2 months. That was it. But so that was our jungle experience. But out in that backyard, because it was so low in elevation, being very close to sea level, it was still high. For Panama, it was close to the actual, what they would consider mountains there. In fact, just a little more of an hour north would be the little Switzerland of Panama. And there the temperature is almost perfect, 70 degrees almost like all year round. And they've developed it perfectly, very well. But where we were was still such low elevation in general. Like I said, the Pacific Ocean on one side, about 30 minutes, and maybe just another side was the Atlantic Ocean. We were not far from the Caribbean, by the way. We could go up, and I think actually we might have gotten up there one time. It was very, very bad area, though, people-wise. It was too dangerous for us to go on in there. It was too slummy, actually. I don't think we actually finished that, but the Caribbean side was not far from where we were at one point. But being that low in elevation, you'd see the shooting stars just, like maybe 12 in a minute sometimes. I'd get out there about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning and look up at the Milky Way, look up at the night sky, and there were the shooting stars just, I was like, God, it's just incredible amount of shooting stars. Incredible amount. And it was so glorious. And there really was out in the middle of nowhere in Central America. So it was a really fantastic experience in some ways. I mean, we saw things and did things there that, like that hacking, that guy, we paid that guy like $10. He bought a bigger bottle of beer. He already had one bottle of beer. There would be these little Catholic, little bitty churches, like maybe 10 or 20 people could fit in there. Like maybe every 5 miles or so you'd see one of these little places and little Catholic icons or something. They're very Catholic there. And he was outside one of those, and he had a huge bottle of beer and a big machete. And we're like, hey, she spoke to him in a little bit. She studied Spanish, like 3 levels in Pimsleur. And she spoke to him and negotiated the deal. And next thing you know, we're like down there, and he's like hacking through the, there was like water sometimes up to our knees, sometimes up to our mid-thigh. I mean, we were wondering like if we would, really go down. But he'd have to hack the way through the jungle. It wasn't only the jungle, but it was a swamp, like a jungle swamp. We had to go through that the first like 20, 30 minutes. And then we got up on a very high, muddy ravine, like on the side of a river. And goddamn, almost once she almost slipped and fell into that shit. I mean, it was very dangerous. It was very dangerous. But this is a girl born and raised in Kiev, Ukraine, who also, ended up going into U.S. Army airborne. And then after I divorced her here and got that completed, along with her sending, signature and paperwork and all that, she went on, and she had told me on the phone at that time, she goes, I'm going to go ahead and try to do Special Forces. So she passed the Special Forces training and went on to U.S. military, special operations. So this is the kind of person I was with, okay? This is the kind of person that, hey, and she's the one that really wanted to see the goddamn waterfall. The waterfall was on the map. And it's like, oh, this is all this tourist literature. This is the great waterfall. People come from all over the world to see it. We get down there, there's nobody. And yeah, there's a waterfall, but getting there was like Tarzan. It was like something you'd see out of a Tarzan movie. But it was worse because he was like, take this machete and just whoosh, whoosh, whoosh through the weeds and shit, and went through the jungle swamp, and we went up the side of this river, and we got there, and she was really happy to see it, took some photos and stuff. I don't know where the photos are at, but come back, and but my God, I mean, you had deadly snakes down in there. This is the Panama jungle, Central America, and that was a hell of an adventure, though. I mean, it was success, but she almost fell off the side of that mud slope up there. We took like a trail up on the side of the river to get up to this waterfall. But that's what she wanted to do. She was pretty brave. Coming from where she grew up in Kiev was nothing that I always say I don't think most Americans, I know maybe things have changed, but from what I've been told, it's actually gotten worse. I don't think many Americans would make it in Kiev for more than 2 weeks. Certainly not as an expat. They might make it as a tourist if they stayed in tourist areas, but I don't think they'd last very long. Just my opinion. It's quite a different life. But that's just a little bit about my past travel experience. So the reason it comes to mind why I start this live stream video today is because I'm thinking, as an astrologer, I know I've got altered goals transits coming up. It's like 3 times longer than the normal transit. I just went through some one. It's also very long. 27th, 28th of July until August 10. And certainly I changed some goals. And I knew this before it happened, and I watched it unfold and actually took advantage of some timing to make some changes in plans and direction and stuff like that. And then I know it's coming up again, though. And I've known it for years. And it's coming up at the end of this month and going all the way into September 13th. So I'm thinking, like, on a forward plan, like if the astrology's really bad on Georgia coming up here, especially in December. And I'm thinking maybe I want to leave this country and stay gone for at least a year, if not forever. And so in making that plan, I'm thinking, okay, I have some ideas, and I have some places I've wanted to see or go or spend time at in the world, because I'm free and I can go wherever the hell I want. And I'm thinking, I know my plans are going to alter and change again by the end of the month. Not by the end of the month, but at the end of this month, that process will start again. And it will continue to change, or until September 13th. Actually, we could put another 3 days on the end of that if you consider the 3-day orb that we use. We could say September 16th. And some people think all astrology is bullshit. That's silly. Why even pay attention to it? But I do it at a professional level. I do it with 18 years of experience, and I do it just having watched it happen. And it's a very unusual thing because they're both so close together. They're usually much farther apart, these altered gold transits, and they're usually only 5 or 6 days. The one that I'm looking at that's coming up is, it's 2 weeks. So it's going to be heavier, bigger impact. So that's frustrating because, you're trying to make a plan and think what your next travel is going to be. And from 14 years of experience in travel that when you run into these altered gold transits, like for example, I was going into Russia and this was coming in, and there was so many things I was trying to get done. There was also like a Jupiter square Jupiter transit. That's where you just run out of time and money. You just run out of resources. Trying to get everything prepared because I'd planned on staying for a few months. In fact, I got a visa for like a 3 months visa or something like that. So I planned on staying over there for 3 months. And so getting everything together, getting everything wrapped up at home, getting ready to take that trip, and it was right on one of those. And on the way over another time, there was one right in the middle of the trip, and I ended up in Germany unexpectedly. Had weather problems and stayed overnight, had a hotel room, and ended up talking with owner and CEO, or I think CEO of a major telecommunications company, and he was asking me like my opinion on the market and things like that. And here I am in a hotel bar, and I'm delayed getting into Russia. And that whole trip was an amazing trip. The whole experience was something like out of a movie. But when also I was going to leave for Ukraine once, I had one, and I never went. So that altered goal was right on the date of departure to fly out to Kiev, and it would be the first time that I would ever be back. I haven't ever been back since 2005. So I was in Russia in 2009. So I was going to leave, and we're on the way to the airport, And my father's like reminding me of all the incredibly uh, wrong things that had happened there, how difficult it is there in Ukraine. And I'm just like, yeah, you know what, you're right. I think I'm going to skip this. And I had been concerned about my brother at the time anyway. The next day, he had a car wreck, a bad one. And we had some, we had some time there with family over that. And so it was a good thing that I stuck around. But that's an example of altered goals. You're on your way. Suddenly, nah, change my mind, I'm not going. Or you're on your way and it's like, no, you're not. You're stuck here for, a little bit. And so anyway, when it's like 2 or 3 times bigger like this one I have that's coming up, it's another time it happened, I was headed home. And my dad got his place at the lake. And I'm like, wait a second. If you got your place, and it happened right at the start of the Altered Goal Transit. I'm like, look, if you got that place, he goes, yeah, I got news. We're going to sign on it and finalize the deal. It was right at the end of the Altered Goal Transit. And he had a project where they're going to have to put a whole new something there. And he had to get somebody, and because I had offered to help him with that. And he went ahead, and it was going to be too big of a job, too big of a project for to not hire out professional crew to come in and do that. But I had changed my plan on travel then and didn't go back for another month or month and a half. So that's another recent example of an altered goal. Another time it was I'd done one of these events here. It's a government related project or event, and went to one. They'd usually have a whole week. They had one. They said, oh, we're going to have more. Nothing ever happened. This was in September 23rd, 2016. So I thought, hey, I got a friend. She's in Batumi at the Black Sea. I'll go there. I'll go visit her. She's invited me. Come down. Let's talk. I'll show you my city. I'm like, great. We had a great reunion or visit here in Tbilisi, up at Tetzmenda and so on, and out at East Point and so on. And I'm thinking, well, but they told me they're going to have some more events, and I'm taking photographs. I'm supposed to be helping. I'm supposed to be a part of that, and nothing ever happened. What did happen on the Altered Goal Transit? My mom calls, and the building that I was hoping would come in November, which would be a month out, it's like, Michael, come. I want you home. Be here on October 19. The building kit will be here, and let's be ready to go. Because we'd been working on this for 6 months. Her and my uncle had asked me to research that and help to get all the information and to get that project together. So I was suddenly, instead of headed to the friend in Batumi, the government never did nothing. That was a complete waste of time again, and a complete waste of my life, waiting for them to give no answer on something they said there would be more of, and they let me know there was nothing. Complete irresponsible, incompetent sons of bitches. Anyway, I suddenly end up flying back to the United States. Suddenly. Altered goal. So that's what those do. And they're especially important if you're a traveler, big traveler, if you're buying plane tickets, or you're taking off work, or you're dealing with serious plans. It's always, if you're into astrology, most of you won't be able to do this, unfortunately, but if you have a professional level astrology, you can find on astro.com, but it's, I think, a little bit more accurate, or using the updated ephemeris of the astrogeometry software through the Magi Society. It's when Mars will apply at 60 degrees to natal Neptune. And that'll usually happen for about 5 to 6 days. And what I'm running into, it's happened within a month of each other, and it's running this next time for 2 full weeks. And the last time it ran for about 2 full weeks. And those are huge, those are bigger changes, bigger change in plans, bigger ones. But when they're 5 or 6 days, if it's in heliocentric sky, it's still going to usually be about 3 times stronger than if it's in geocentric sky. But when it's twice as long, it's going to be very, very strong. Also, if they're close together, so it's unusual. But let's say there's 2 like I'm having now in 1 month, and then there's a third one in heliocentric near. If they're in a 30 to 45 day window of each other, it's usually a big change in your life, big change in direction in your life. It's usually quite a big change in direction in your life. So when these will hit, you know, I've like told the senators, for example, I sent a letter saying, hey, I'm done with this project. 5 years, done, waited on an answer for this one media event, no answer, done. Can't sit around and waste time. Life is too precious. And so that's the kind of things they'll do. I mean, it will come in, you'll make plans, for example, with a friend to go start a business. Something happens, half the family stops speaking to them because you're American, and their kids are watching, you know, the propaganda about the drone strikes out of Pakistan, and they're angry at Americans. And a lot of people don't like Americans here anyway. So half the family stops speaking. They got to find out that, oh, okay, well then the business that we were going to do, all that is gone and out the window. This is another example where you have a plan and suddenly your plans are changed. But what I found in total, in that situation, there were two of these close together in 1 month period of time. And one in heliocentric sky, which you won't be able to see unless you're using magi astrology and magi astrology software. When you get your altered goal transits, typically they really can involve the time you're about to travel. Either you're going to travel and you didn't expect to travel, or you're going to travel and suddenly you decide, you know what, I'm not going to travel. It's like that a lot of times. Not only, sometimes it can be you're quitting something and you're starting something. Like when my plans suddenly changed and I ended up back in Missouri on that family do-it-yourself building kit with the steel frame building that we put up, that was an example of that coming in early and coming home early, much earlier, like a month earlier than possibly we had planned. So anyway, about travel, I guess you could say most of my little live stream today has been about, because this is relevant to travelers if they had the supreme insight to know this type of astrology, which on astro.com is called Altered Goals Transit. It's a Western astrology technique, but it's when transiting Chiron will apply square to natal. I'm sorry, that's an enemies around every corner transit. Chiron square Mars is enemies around every corner transit. I'm thinking about the prediction I made on Georgia in that astrology coming up. That particular astrology is starting on Georgia today or tomorrow, though, however. Enemies around every corner. They call it a different name now. They call it like excessive energy or something like that. But in the actual description on Astrodynst out of Swiss American astrology site in Switzerland, astro.com, they actually in the description still call it enemies around every corner. They just changed the name of it. But the actual energy for Alta Gold transit, that actual transit is Mars 60 degrees, applying 60 degrees to natal Neptune. And like I said, it usually lasts 5 or 6 days. But it will change your plan. Now, if you've got it in the middle of a heartbreak transit, that's significant, because let's say it's a looped heartbreak transit, and a lot of times if you're in a marriage or a business partnership or something, that will cause a challenge to separation or a divorce or a situation that'll lead to that. And if there's an altered goal thrown in there in the mix, or enemies around every corner, you can start looking for, enemy involvement, intrigue, schemes being played out. And that's actually what happened when Yulia and I had our separation. There was a 2 weeks enemies around every corner transit, and there was some enemy scheming and planning and things like that, intrigues going on. And but also for me, it was right in the middle of a looped heartbreak transit, and it was on the heliocentric side that it just peaked out, which is 3 times stronger. So usually on the heliocentric peaks is when those are the strongest, and where the event takes place, usually that's considered the bad luck or the heartbreak or the loss in love or money or marriage or relationship or partnership or maybe even a health issue. But usually it's one of these other things, although it can affect health in some cases. And anyway, that's enough on the astrology, because I see some people here that have come on before that have actually gotten astrology from me. And I know that I'll be, this will be posted later on some video websites. So for people that are interested in that, that's some little technical, practical techniques that if you're looking for those particular transits and you're planning, you're traveling, you're doing a partnership, you're doing a relationship, you're traveling, especially if it's world travel. It's nice to know, because like in the position I'm in right now, in less than 10 days is when mine starts again, Alter Gold Transit. But it's heavy, it's long, and it's strong. And so when I'm planning on travel, there's already 3 or 4 things ahead in the next 3 months. I know what those things are. Some of those things are here. Some of those things are back in the United States. So if something changes and suddenly my plan is to travel and it's before these other 2 or 3 major, events coming up in the next 2 or 3 months, then I need to do that with consideration to which side of the ocean I'm going to be on, or will I just say and be in a whole other country or a whole other location altogether. So when you're planning like that, and it involves maybe at least $1,000, maybe it's going to involve $2, $3, $4,000, with the circumstances and the situation. It's nice to know the weather, so to speak, right? It's nice to know that something unexpected, almost unmanageable, so to speak, or let's say even perhaps intolerable, or let's just say you want to flow with that energy. More positively speaking, you're ready to flow with that energy, which is where I'm at, and it was where I was at before. You're ready for that. You've got an idea, and when you see those things kind of fall in, you're ready to roll with that. But it's at the same time, with that foreknowledge, it's a little bit frustrating because you're like, okay, I'm ready to plan, but I know my plans are about to change. That's what happened last time, right? Last time I thought that, well, there's a pretty good chance I'm going to get into the multinational military exercises and film. But I know there's a chance that I may not, because I'd actually done some things and said some things that would put that, it would surprise me, actually, if I would still get in, actually. And so it worked out in such a way that it actually, in one sense, I would have loved to have done it, but in another sense, it was perfect timing for me to say, you know what, I can't afford to waste that kind of time in my life for a no response. So it kind of worked out, more in the way that I would have wished it to work out in any case, although either answer, either way, would be fine. But I had prepared for either way in advance as well, and actually kind of probably pushed it more in the favor of the way that it went, which is probably more accurate to say what I wanted to happen in the first place. You could say that it was a way out, so to speak. But it's not my choice. But it was my choice based on the demands of what I was asked to do, and if you can't do that, then you have every right to get out. So it's kind of a catch-22. So it's the same thing. When you have this kind of foreknowledge, you can not only be frustrated a little bit with your planning. It's very unusual to have this kind of transits come up. They'll come up maybe once, twice, every other year or so, maybe every year, but positively speaking, there's a lot of great things to look forward to. It's life, and with life, with all its ups and downs, the negative, the positive, if you choose to look ahead, you can choose to embrace it and be ready to deal with that, or you can be like a cringing dog, as I read this term in some of the material out of Switzerland lately. I thought that was a unique term. And not look ahead. That's fine. Some people don't want to know this stuff. People are afraid to get astrology from me sometimes because they had heard, for example, that I could predict things or tell them things that are not so positive. And the whole point of it is that if you can know that you might maybe deal with a negative influence from an astrology transit, that you can maybe minimize or avoid some of the negative aspect or the negative influence from that situation. And I believe that sometimes you can. I believe some things are destined in a life, but I think there are some things that you can avoid. I'll give you an example. I've used one of these examples before, but there was, I predicted there was going to be a death. It was pretty simple to see. On one hand, there was a family member that had been threatening, not my immediate family, but there was somebody that had been threatening suicide, talking about suicide. They were in pretty bad shape. I had a talk with another family member. We had medical intervention for that person, and they were around for a few more years. Did it help something? Did it prevent the death that I had predicted? In that same time, I'm at my mother's nursing home, and I'd been back on the computer doing some internet work. I come to the kitchen, getting a drink of water or something, or coffee or something. Young staff woman is there, trained, very good person, about 25, 26 years old. and there was a woman that was about 93 years old. She had been in Africa for the last 25 years of her life. About the age of 40, she went as a missionary, Christian missionary, into Rwanda. She called it the little Switzerland of Africa. She was a midwife. She helped deliver babies. One time she said she made the delivery in the middle of the road in Africa at night under the moonlight because the woman started to have the child right there in the middle of the road. Wonderful woman, but she was so old that when I'd seen her, she had heard that I was a world traveler. Her eyes lit up. And if you spend a lot of time with the elderly, as I have, I spent years with the elderly. I used to be in that business. And I could, her body's frail. She's a walker, she's going slowly. But her eyes were, you could see the young soul, the eternal soul, the eternal spring of her youth right there. So her eyes lit up, and I could tell she had a million stories. She had 1,000 things to tell me as a fellow world traveler. And it's such a beautiful experience. And I see there's Alicia Askman's here. She has an awesome belly dance video in particular that I'd say she's got 1,000 probably, but she's got one in particular that was really awesome. I'd seen her about a month or so ago and shared it on my wall. Anyway, people like this that are world travelers, like Alicia out of Russia, she's traveled so much. Friends in New Zealand and other countries have traveled so much, and I've also met them here at the hostel coming into here. There's just an experience and an understanding and a knowing between world travelers that's indescribable. You can stay up all night talking to each other about your travel stories, about this place, about that flight, this train trip. There's just so many things you can talk about, and the life, what it's like to come back home after being away for a year or two, or what it's like to be back in the real world, so to speak, versus being over in some completely different life, some completely different country, completely different mentality, absolutely different language. Even in New Zealand, they're driving on the opposite side of the road, almost like it's like in the opposite side of the direction. The steering wheel's on the opposite side of the car. It's like, how do you do that? I'm not going to try here. It's just the things you wouldn't expect in life to be absolutely opposite on another side of the planet. And what a wonderful, large, huge planet it is. And so I've got this incredible amounts of stories from travel. So you only can relate to another if they've also traveled in truth. And I think there's actually a Russian proverb about that, about travel. But it's something, if I remember right, there's some saying that it's like you've lived 1,000 lives or something. And that would be very accurate to my experience. So here's this woman on my mom's nursing home, Highland Home for Seniors. She's on the porch. I sit down. I'm just in from the airport that week. She's already heard and knows I'm a world traveler. Her eyes light up. And she's telling me a few stories, like the woman having the baby in the middle of the road, in the middle of the night in Rwanda, Africa, and how they helped to establish and build a hospital there for children and for the births, the podiatry, the children's hospital or the birthing hospital there. And that was a great life work. She was a part of who established that hospital for pregnant mothers there and newborn children. And that was a great woman. That was a great work. So I was in the kitchen. There she is. And our staff girl is, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" And I came over to the table. I'm like, because it was right when I had predicted someone was going to die in that week. And so she's moving her finger, and she couldn't speak. She had a stroke. There was about 11, 12 people at the table. And I kind of took over along with the girl, and I said, "Okay, everybody, it's time to get up now. Let's go to your rooms. We have a little bit of an unusual situation at the moment, so we're gonna be doing some things here. So everyone, would you please, maybe just for a little bit, leave the dining area." And then we're calling emergency services, we're calling the hospital, we're calling the ambulance is on its way, we're calling my mother, owner, operator, LPN. And after talking to the hospital and ER, we're lifting her up and we're getting her into transport. And 10 days later, she was dead. So this is the death that, you think maybe on the one hand, we may have prevented a suicide by intervention, by listening, speaking to other family, and taking action. And that person's life improved from that hospital stay that resulted from that. On the other hand, the death that I predicted happened. And in such case, I don't think there's any amount of... That's fate. That's deep, harsh heartbreak, and I had to see, and deal with that. And went to a funeral about 13, 14 days later. Was there to support my brother, who was a pallbearer at the funeral, and there to support my mother, and there to support that family. Part of which the family ended up over at my mother's nursing care home. And quite frankly, because they, I think, they understood that we were family. They understood that at that time that I and my family were showing the compassion in a time of loss, in that time of life, of grief and loss, in the time of the passing of a loved one, of their family member. And in this case, it was a woman's sister who ended up coming over with her husband, and they lived out some of the last years of their lives right there at Highland Home for Seniors. So by my having this foreknowledge, though, for me, because I had very difficult, very, very extreme difficult situations in life before starting my world travels, and I had learned to look ahead. I had to learn to, try to see some things before they may come. And in part of my studies and research and metaphysics, that's what I had learned to do. So by doing that, in my case, although I had predicted death, which is a big no-no by some of these other psychics or astrologers or New Agers or metaphysicians or preachers, priests, whoever, whatever, I do what I want within the law. And if I want to predict death, I'll predict it. But my aim is not to do it negatively or with intent to harm. My aim was to, and my practice was, supporting and being prepared to support those around me in that shocking, unfortunate life event that I consider to be destiny. So when there's a destiny or a fate, that's quite a bit different than choice. When we can take a conscious initiative or a conscious application of our will and make a life change. So if we say we can take a psychic insight, an accurate psychic insight, an intuition, an astrological forecast, if it's accurate, I think very few are. But if you can then make a course change in your life, then I think that's applying your will. And so some things that I think we can change. We can choose our direction. Other things, like that death, at that moment, that time, that place, it was already in my chart. It was in my stars from the moment I came in as a soul, as a spirit, into this world. At that date, time, in the chart, harsh heartbreak. At that date, time, and place, it happened at my mother's business, their family business back home. There was her appointed time to die. I was there. Did the cousin avoid his death? Did the woman here that I'd done an astrology reading for, where we predicted the possibility that something could happen, harsh heartbreak, same situation. Looped heartbreak transit, harsh heartbreak. She intervened normally when she may not have, to a greater degree in her mother's situation. And doctors claim that had she not done that, her mother would have died. They had a mix-up where they thought that one in there thought that it was this when it was that, and because she had heard my astrology reading and had the forewarning, she got her mother to the hospital, and the doctor said if you hadn't got her here in this time, she would be dead. And I told her in the astrology reading a month or 2 or 3 before that happened that maybe she could save somebody and change something. So does astrology, foresight, and foreknowledge have the ability to prevent an unnecessary or untimely death? Does it have the ability to extend, by someone else's intervention or having the possession of this knowledge and this foresight, does it have the ability to give the power to extend one's life? And there are those who have consulted to me that would answer, I think so, or yes. Ronald Reagan used an astrologer. There's a couple of videos on YouTube about that. He used an astrologer for every down-to-the-minute meeting that he had in his presidency of the United States, which was quite a long presidency, by the way. He also used it to try to avoid the 4-year curse, or the curse by the Native American Indian that was put on the U.S. presidency. Did he avoid the effects of the curse? Well, he got injured by an assassin, unfortunately. The counter-argument to that, as for the astrologer's involvement, was that by using astrology, he did not die. He was just injured, whereas the others died in office of that curse. Is it true or not? You can study that if you want and answer that question for yourself. The Magi Society would say this, and then I'm going to close this video. The Magi Society teaches that the number one most important thing that you will do if you use astrology for anything, the most important thing is when you will marry, the date that you will do your wedding. And of course the wedding partner, but the date is supremely important as well. Is the date, the wedding date. There are tons of research to verify this, to suggest this. To the extent that a bad wedding date, either your astrological transits are links to the wedding date, or your spouse's astrological transits are links to the wedding date, or the day itself. Like I married Yulia on a heartbreak day here in Tbilisi. I didn't even know what Magi astrology was when we had that marriage date. It was set by a Vedic astrologer. Well, Vedic astrologers, it was a powerful date, very powerful date. She went into the heights of the U.S. military service. That's what she chose to do, and that's what she did. We started an internet business together. At that time, we traveled from here to Panama, took up second residency in Panama, permanent residency. We ended up in the United States for a while, and I ended up traveling on, and she ended up in the military, highest levels. Finished her service there after 4 years, I think. But it was a heartbreak day, and Saturn was opposing Chiron that day, February 3rd here in Tbilisi, 2006. I didn't know what Magi astrology was then. I had no idea. It was in about April or May after that I applied to join the society. I think it was in 2007 I actually got the membership. It was in 2011 when I learned what a looped astrology transit was, and also got the heliocentric chart to see the fourth peak that usually comes with the 3 peaks in geocentric that make a looped astrology transit, which are more impactful, heavier, life-altering or life event, life influence type of transits in astrology. So if it's a heartbreak transit, and you got that 4th peak, and being that heliocentric sky is usually 3 times stronger in influence and effect, that's usually when you can see a life event, an actual event happen, is on the heliocentric peak. Anyway, interesting stuff. My life in some cases has been textbook down to the within 3 days of heaven's clockwork. Textbook Magi astrology. But you can only see that when you're using the heliocentric chart. You can only see that when you know what a looped astrology transit is also. You can only see that when you're using Magi astrology, in my opinion, when you're using the lunar-based housing system, not the solar-based. I mean, the solar-based has also got its accuracy and its uses, but I have a tendency to feel that the planetary geometry that can be used, the lunar-based chart of Magi astrology, is absolutely a gift from the creation, a gift from the universal intelligence, so to speak, a gift from the stars, a gift from a higher intelligence. Because that planetary geometry and a lunar-based magi astrology chart is very, very accurate, and it's like clockwork. And there are predictive indicators in those. And it's the same when you put one chart of a potential partner, business, love, relationship, just friendship, whatever. When you match a magi astro chart to another in a combined alignment chart, then it's even more interesting, because then the planetary geometry becomes intensely important in the predictive sense of what the harmony or disharmony will be, where the clashes and linkages are in that, or what the outcome can be. The other part of the outcome, 50% of the outcome, is the first meeting date. But ultimately, the wedding date, above all these other things, because that's a lot for most people that have no interest in astrology, or limited interest in astrology to contemplate, perhaps, for some, is the wedding date. To the point that their research suggests that it can even shorten a life or lengthen a life depending on that wedding date. Have a good day, friends. Enjoy.